I'm going to have the rest of my panel come up as well. All right, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for having me here. This is one of my favorite topics, certainly space being my favorite topic. I love to talk to rooms who are actually listening rather than my wife who does the glazed look over when I start getting into it. So the topic today is a very hot topic in the satellite and satellite communications world right now, and ostensibly in the overall telecommunications world with the advent of what we call LEO, or low Earth orbiting satellites. My history with LEO extends my previous role with Telesat as a senior advanced systems designer and lead of their innovation program a few years back. We were stumbling and looking around for ways to change the satellite communications industry, and we started looking at low Earth orbiting constellations. About the same time, some folks with companies called OneWeb and SpaceX had a little bit of a falling out. Elon Musk got into the LEO world, and then it seemed like everybody was interested in LEO. But I'll vouch for Telesat and say that we were there ahead of that curve. We beat that news story to it. We really saw value in it at that time, and that's where my history with LEO comes from. Since then, I've moved out to an organization called Satellite Canada Innovation Network. I like to think maybe we might be a little brother of Sengen at one point. We're kind of doing the same thing that Sengen does, but for the satellite industry. So that's where I am, and I'm excited to have this panel here for you today. There's a lot of interesting knowledge and a lot of moving parts in this. It's a very complex system. I'm going to kind of step back a little bit and kind of tell you a little bit about SATCOM and how LEO differs from GEO on a technical kind of level, just so you have an idea of what the difference is between SATCOM from GEO versus SATCOM from LEO. And that'll be a bit of a backdrop for the rest of what we're talking about. So we have one visual slide to put up, if we can get that up there. It's coming. The first point to really make in the difference between LEO and GEO is the distance it is away from the surface of the Earth. So GEO satellites are about 36,000 kilometers off of the surface. Radio and light travels at a finite speed, and it takes a long time, almost a half a second, to get out to that far, and another half a second to come back, give or take. So that's not too big a problem if you're just streaming Netflix. It becomes a problem if you're talking on the phone or doing real-time video chat. So LEO, low Earth orbit, is really anything from about 200 kilometers up to about 2,000. We have the 1,000 kilometers on there just as the backdrop for Telesat. That's where Telesat's LEO constellation will sit. So rather than being about a half a second, you're now talking a few tens of milliseconds, which is really negligible when we're talking about phone calls or video. The other challenge or distinction between LEO and GEO, and the globe isn't quite drawn to show this, but the GEO plane, the orbit plane, would be on the equator. And as the Earth is turning, the GEO satellite is actually orbiting the Earth at the same rate. So you can have a fixed satellite dish, just stick it on your house, point it in one direction, and it will always be pointed in or around where that GEO satellite is. So that's where you look around on the apartment buildings these days and you see the little dishes. They're all pointed in roughly the same direction. They're all pointing at a GEO satellite. Those things are just a plate on a rod, and they're bolted into place. You move them once, and that's it. For LEO, the period of the orbit is a lot faster. You're talking like an hour and a half for it to do a full circle of the Earth. So that means for you fixed on the ground, you're going to see the satellite come up over the horizon, fly overhead, come back down to the other horizon, and lose sight of it within about 15 minutes. That brings a few challenges. One, you need multiple satellites to be able to maintain 100% time connection. So you need to have one ground antenna tracking one satellite. As you lose it, you have to have another one to track the next one so that you always have some sort of connectivity. That moving piece is a very complex piece. And we'll probably talk about some of the technologies that companies are looking at to overcome that piece of the system. So that's a little bit of the backdrop. The last little question you might have is, what is MEO? For the real astute people out there, M is medium, so medium Earth orbit. There are some constellations in there. That's kind of the region where GPS sits, and there's a number of other constellations and uses for that. But we're going to really deal with LEO and GEO for today. All right, we're going to go over to the panelists. So I'm going to move over and have a seat, and we'll introduce the group we have. All right, have I changed mics now? Good. All right, you guys ready?
Do it.
Excellent. All right, to my left, I'm going to have each one of them introduce themselves very briefly. To my immediate left is Tim Brown, who is the Director of Community Infrastructure for the Government of Nunavut. Tim.
Hi all. I think I'm here as the human interest portion of this panel. I'm not going to be able to field too many technical questions, but I moved to Nunavut in 2000, January 2000. I've been working there with the government in Nunavut pretty much that whole time. And as I was discussing a little bit with Stephen before the session, it's amazing how we're now talking about LEO, when a couple of years ago the only options were satellite or fiber. And the potential for LEO right now is what I really want to be able to share what it's going to mean for Nunavut.
Thanks, Tim. To Tim's left is Ariane Cornell, who has the amazingly cool title of Director of Astronaut and Orbital Sales at Blue Origin. Ariane?
Great, Ryan, thank you so much, and thank you so much for having me. So what am I doing here? We're here to talk about the satellite system. At Blue Origin, the role that we're playing that is we are Telesat's ride to space. So why don't we show the first slide here? So this is the rocket that will be taking many of Telesat's constellation to space. This is our new orbital rocket called New Glenn, named after John Glenn, the first American to orbit space. If you go to the next slide, this is the largest rocket. This is all to scale. This is the largest rocket that has been built in a long time. It's going to, in total, be over 300 feet, over 100 meters tall. And the first stage, the first part of that rocket is going to be reusable. What you see there in the box, the one on the furthest right, that's the first stage landed. So it's actually taller than some of the rockets that are already flying. So it's a big rocket, but more importantly, it's a very powerful rocket. And almost most importantly for our customers at Telesat is that it has a very large fairing. That silver bit at the top is where we put all the satellites. And it is 7 meters in diameter. It has over 2 times the volume of anything that's flying today on the market, which means that Telesat can put that many more satellites in, and which it improves the economics of the launch, and it improves the economics, therefore, of the cost per satellite for Telesat. So launch is the majority of the constellation's cost. So to the extent that we can support Telesat put up their very innovative constellation is wonderful. Why don't we go ahead and actually roll the video of what New Glenn looks like when it flies. A little commentary over it. So again, at over 300, it's about 340 feet or so, so well over 100 meters. This is a huge rocket. We're building it and launching it down in Cape Canaveral, down in Florida off the East Coast. Again, the first stage will come back and land. Those fins at the top move so we can direct it. Also has what look like wings on the base of the rocket. Those are wings. We call them strakes, but they're wings effectively. That's the manufacturing complex that we've completed. So the rocket will be able to take 13 metric tons to GTO or 45 metric tons to LEO. So now you guys are experts in what GEO versus LEO means. So here comes the first stage back to land. It's going to land on a moving ship, not a platform out in the ocean, but a moving ship, because moving ships are actually more stable. They're not at the whims of the wave out there in the ocean. A ship underway has a lot of, we're going to use a lot of maritime technology to stabilize the platform, which means that we can launch and land in a wider set of weather states. So the first part comes back, and then the most important part, this is a video of a geosatellite, so we're going to release that satellite and put it in the right orbit, or in the case of the Leo constellation, let go of their collection. So at Blue Origin, we are very proud to be part of this constellation. Let me tell you that Telesat in particular is one of the most important global operators, among other reasons because they take technical risk. They take intelligent technical risk. There are other companies, as we mentioned, that are looking into these constellations, but it is, this one has a lot of respect out there in the global market just because of the technical capability that's being built into it from the very beginning. So we're very proud to be part of this constellation, and I'll turn it over to Stephen and tell you a little bit more about that constellation.
Thank you, Ariane. Yeah, Stephen Hampton is the final panelist. He's in government affairs with Telesat. And Stephen.
Perfect, thanks. And I'd like to thank everyone at CENGEN, first and foremost, for hosting us today and giving us the opportunity to come and talk to you about one of the really new, exciting opportunities in telecommunications. So Telesat is a former Crown Corp of Canada. We were created 50 years ago this year to deliver connectivity to all of Canada. And over 50 years, we're quite proud to have several firsts and innovations, from the first ever domestic communication satellite system about 47 years ago, to conducting the first ever 5G test over LEO just earlier this year. And as we're here to talk about LEO, about 5 or 6 years ago, we looked and said, what does the market want? Where are we going? And we're a traditional geo-satellite operator today. We provide direct-to-home television. We do internet. In Nunavut, we provide internet there today. But we said, where's the market going? Where's the opportunities here? And what we came to the conclusion is that LEO is the future, and we are in a very unique position to capitalize on it and really, not to overstate it, but truly change the landscape around the world in telecommunications. So I too have a quick little video, and I'll just let you get to run it. It just gives you a sense of LEO just in general from our perspective.
Telesat Canada has been pioneering satellite technology and connecting Canadians and the world for more than 50 years. Telesat's innovations led to Canada becoming the first country to have a domestic communications satellite system. We still operate out of Ottawa, employing hundreds across Canada. Connecting Canadians across our vast country has long been a challenge. While most of us take the internet for granted, millions of Canadians, particularly in rural and remote areas, still can't access high-speed internet. That's limiting economic growth, impeding access to education, and preventing healthcare delivery to remote regions. So why can't existing satellite systems help? Traditional satellites providing GPS and TV services don't work well for internet connections. They're too high up, meaning the round-trip time for signals is longer. That's called latency. And with traditional satellites, the latency is just too high. That means lag, slow speeds, timeouts, and poor quality internet. That's where Telesat LEO comes in. LEO stands for Low Earth Orbit. Telesat LEO will be 35 times closer to Earth than traditional satellites, resulting in a shorter trip for signals, making ultra-fast, fiber-like internet possible anywhere. Everyone agrees universal access to high-speed internet is a necessity for growing the economy of the future. But wouldn't laying fiber optic cables be easier? In cities, the cost to lay fiber can be supported by thousands of densely populated users. It's easy and cheaper. But connecting rural and remote areas gets expensive quickly. LEO provides an affordable solution for those longer distance connections, and as a backup to fiber if the connection gets cut. LEO is here now. We've already launched our first test satellite. We're working with world-class companies to create an affordable made-in-Canada solution to the world's connectivity challenges. As Canadians, we know high-speed internet access is essential to our daily life, and we're committed to ensuring every Canadian and citizen of the world has access to this basic right. Because we know that high-speed internet doesn't just mean access. It means health, prosperity, and empowered communities. Telesat LEO. Connecting everyone, everywhere.
Perfect.
Excellent. Thank you, Stephen. And that's probably a really good segue to talking about what is the opportunity of LEO? I mean, we've talked a bit about rural broadband, but does it stop there? Is there a larger opportunity that Telesat sees?
For sure. So when we think of connectivity, there's, we all think of our cell phones or we think of connecting to our house, but there's several other verticals, and I would say it's places where fiber can't go. So if it flies or floats, so planes, ships, that is an area where we can connect with satellite. We've also got rural areas where the reality is we're not going to be able to get a fiber cable into some of these communities or a microwave link or other terrestrial wireless solutions. So there's this large demand globally that LEO comes in and fits that. And I think in Canada, we look and there's about 2.3 million households across Canada that are unconnected. And that's a huge number. But globally, half the world's population doesn't have internet. So, it's not only a great market opportunity, but it's there's a social good here that we really need to address, and certainly I think Tim can highlight some of that about just in the GN with the government of Nunavut. But it is broader than just rural broadband in Canada.
Tim, you didn't have a video, but can you talk about the opportunity from the government? Yeah.
We're bringing a slide up of Nunavut.
Yeah.
To that point about the potential for development is very real with regards to with LEO. Living in Nunavut for the last 20 years, when I first got there, we were still on a dial-up, and we've gone through this evolution, and I think just this past fall, we finally got cell phone service in 25 communities. What most folks don't understand, I mean, it's happening in our backyard in Canada, to be able to have the same access to that you would take for granted down south, up north, is difficult to explain because you're using the same words. You want to connect everybody. Everybody wants to be able to communicate better. You want to be able to just be able to do everything that you can on the internet. But that lag in development, so half the world's not connected to the internet. In Nunavut, I would say that's probably still true of the population. There's 36,000. I would say about half probably don't have access to the internet either. But even with the access that we do have, the frustration is to be able to have things that kind of work. And I don't know how to be able to express that, but you have your, like for example, FaceTime. You can do it. You can do it from Calvert to Rankin, but every picture is granulated, very grainy, and it stops and it drops all the time on you. So it's kind of like you can see, you can almost touch it and make it work, but you just don't get to experience it. Only with the advent of these new cellular deployment have we been able to actually be able to use data on our cell phones to be able to look at video streaming on Facebook. Before that, I mean, up until this year, it was like, okay, forget it. Scroll past every kind of picture that you're looking at. So you have this kind of, you have a smartphone that's pretty dumb. Like it's that level of experience. So
It would be frustrating.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ariane, representing the ecosystem of other industry stakeholders, does LEO represent an opportunity for those people and companies?
Oh, absolutely. We're really excited about it because these constellations are a lot of satellites, right? Telesat's talking 200-300 satellites, if not more. I mean, more satellites equals more launches. So we're really excited to have that opportunity to be a part of it in that sense. The other thing is that you're also going to need to be refreshing those satellites as well. And I think one of the reasons why you're hearing a lot about these LEO, there was a previous wave of LEO constellations. This concept is not new. But I think one of the reasons why it's back, and we're talking about it truly viably, is the satellite technology, and I'll let Stephen and you talk to that, but also the rocket technology. We are, not only do we have a very large rocket, but it's reusable. And because it's reusable, we're bringing down the cost of launch. I flew here last night. Now, if we had thrown away the plane as soon as I got here, and I had to buy a new plane, not a new ticket, but a new plane to go home to Seattle, that would be silly and completely cost prohibitive. That's basically the model of launch that we have today. Now, that's improved with reusable rockets. We've been working on our reusable rocket for decades, I can say that. With that reusability comes a lower cost, and those lower costs mean lower prices that we push down to our customers. So that's why a constellation of hundreds of satellites makes sense today, and we're really happy that we can be a part of making that viable today.
And just to top up on that, and really I would say Blue Origin has absolutely led the way on this, and we're so excited to be partnering with them. The launch costs are such a huge portion of any satellite constellation or deployment. And when we started looking at, this LEO thing looks like the future. How do we actually go about doing it? And one of the first questions we had to ask ourselves was launch. And I would say because of innovations from Blue Origin and others, we're now at a place where it's exactly that, it's affordable. And if it's affordable for us, then it means it's affordable for our customers. So, it is, you cannot overstate how important this aspect of deploying constellations are.
I just want to jump on that affordability argument, which is really sensitive in the north. A bag of milk costs about $10 in Iqaluit, and that's around the cheapest that you can get in the whole territory. My internet bill for myself, I get 100 gigs for 99 bucks out of Xplornet. My daughter uses that up in 2 weeks, my eldest.
She really spreads it out over time.
Well, and I had to go and get another 200 gigs out of Ice Wireless to be able to, for another 100 bucks. So it's 200 bucks of internet for 300 gigs of Wi-Fi. So hearing the potential in terms of those cost reductions with LEO is very exciting, because it means that I'm well off by any standard in Nunavut. But if you're looking at the rest of the population, to be able to have that affordability, it's not just the supply of it, it's being able to actually access it and afford it to be in your home. So that's a key part.
Very good. So in addition to launch, what are some of the other reasons why, and maybe we'll dial this back a bit. Ariane mentioned that this isn't a new topic or a new idea. Anybody who was playing along in the 90s might know the names Iridium, Globalstar, and Orbcomm were 3 constellations that went up and were going to revolutionize communications. They ended up being expensive, underutilized, and all 3 went bankrupt. Probably a good case for not getting into LEO. However, all 3 of those constellations have refreshed with 2nd generations and ostensibly are running viable businesses now. That's not quite broadband. Those are cellular and internet. So maybe, Stephen, we'll start with you on why now? What has changed to make this the right solution now?
Yeah, and I would, going back to that conversation of LEO's the future, how do we do it? Does it make sense? And we started from the perspective of how do we deliver for our customers, and what do our customers want? And then let's build a constellation that addresses that. And there's a couple technologies I'll highlight, and Ryan, please feel free to jump in, being the engineer. But there's a couple. So the launch was the first big one. That was the first big hurdle. The second one was in GEO. When we, let's say a customer came to us and said, we want to provide direct-to-home television, build us a GEO satellite. It would take a couple years. It would cost hundreds of millions of dollars, and then we'd launch it. And with a LEO constellation, we're 300 satellites is ours. We need to be able to pump out satellites a heck of a lot faster, and at a way cheaper price point. So big advances in automation and advanced manufacturing, first and foremost, is another huge component. The other thing, and Ryan touched on this a bit in his introduction, is when you've got 300 satellites orbiting the Earth in different orbits, different planes, you've got millions of customers on the ground, a lot of them moving. You need an incredibly smart software system to be able to actually orchestrate this. And we've got a cool partnership with Google's Loon to help us do that. So AI is another huge advancement that's making LEO a reality. And then there's just some other things like the direct radiating antennas. So the ability for us to be able to dynamically put gigabits of capacity down in one given area. In a community like Iqaluit, it's 10,000-ish people. You need a lot of capacity there. The alternative would be a cruise ship. Again, you need a lot of capacity dropped down into one area. You've got inter-satellite links. So in our constellation, our satellites can talk to each other via lasers between the satellites. And from a redundancy standpoint, this is massively important. For example, if one of the satellites has a glitch or an issue, we can then just route through that satellite via optical inter-satellite links. We can also, for example, beam up to our satellite from Australia, come down to Canada without it ever touching a terrestrial network. So governments obviously have an interest in that. I think other technologies that are important, all of our satellites have onboard processing in space. So again, just from an encryption standpoint and from an efficiency standpoint, there's huge leaps and advances there. So for us, it was kind of here's all the things that we need to do to meet demand, and we just feel like now is the time, and we've been running nonstop since.
Anything to add, Arian?
No, I think I touched on
You
from the
kinda hit
from
the
the
launch, yeah.
launch perspective why now is good.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay.
The confluence, the stars are aligning, so to speak, on this. So.
Same?
From my
Is there
perspective-
something on the demand side that has changed?
What I find mind-blowing is that these things are now starting to line up. All these stars are lining up, I guess, with regards to LEO. Because, I've gone through my share of crazy ideas. One of my buddies is in Iqaluit. We've had conversations of dreaming about balloons in the air, like weather balloons that are low enough that you could still bounce these signals down fast enough so you could reduce this latency issue. Part of my career working with a commercial lending organization and looking at one of these ideas about how to give the feel of high-speed internet in communities. The idea about being able to have like a central server, download the stuff trickling in overnight time and making it happen, then you would just log in and connect to that server and you'd have that sort of Netflix feel. It's not obviously Netflix streaming like you would have on demand. And going through all these different iterations, and now here we are. Well, you're just going to be able to do it. Like it's going to be streaming right from the source, as opposed to all these like crazy workarounds that you're trying to figure out. So,
And just talking about demand a little bit, a fun little exercise is, for the rest of the day, think about how many times you do something that connects to the internet. So every time that you look at your phone or your phone vibrates, or you go home and log onto the internet or check Facebook or anything like this, this question of demand, I think there's massive demand, and there's study after study that shows the demand for broadband is growing exponentially year over year, and it's only going to continue growing. I know there was an earlier session on smart cities. Well, that is a perfect example of massive demand. So I think it's not that demand is bigger now than it has ever been, but it's just there's a constant growing demand, and LEO comes in and fits that demand. And just I would say quickly, LEO's not meant to compete with other terrestrial networks. We're not going to be competing for your internet service in downtown Ottawa. It really is for areas where fiber or terrestrial wireless can't go. Or it'll take too long to go. So, that's really, I think, kind of just as it's a complementary, it's an extra tool in the toolkit for universal connectivity.
So I just want to jump on that because I wasn't joking about a slide for Nunavut, because most Canadians don't understand the distances that Nunavut actually entails. Like a fifth of Canada's landmass, I think I did it as a comparison. Kugluktuk to Iqaluit is Victoria to Toronto. In terms of in the 3 time zones that we have to deal with. And those communities range from 120 in Grise Fjord to 8,000 in Iqaluit, and then everything in between from 3,000, and it tapers down to a few communities at 1,000. Being able to actually work your network on that scale of geography has always been a logistical problem. It's always going to be a logistical problem. But being able to have this technology to be able to meet that communication demand, it just means a lot more in terms, like you're going to see like that release from that boxed in mentality, that sense of isolation that we have, because that demand is just going to keep on growing. That project I was talking about in terms of being able to fund that server and then giving that feel, that was actually started to be able to give It was borrowed from an idea from Northern Australia. It was put through from Isuma TV, Isuma Film Productions. And they were looking at being able to bring the third screen to Inuit youth in order to be able to allow them to be able to do more creative outlets in terms of being able to express their sort of their day-to-day life and being able to communicate that. And then from there, find ways to be able to capture their culture and being able to interpret it in a way that makes more sense for a 21st century world. Because you still have in Nunavut, you do have that very, very real traditional versus futuristic divide happening in the communities. And so being able to, I can only just see the demand. My point here, I'm just saying that the demand is just going to keep growing as I watch kids like using the screens, using the, my daughters were on iVideo, making their own videos in their room kind of thing. But if you're taking that to the nth level out in the communities, nature hates a vacuum, and it's just going to keep growing that way.
I mean, full disclosure, I'm actually half French, half American, so I'm kind of Canadian.
We average it out.
Yeah, for the day, please, thanks. It's inspiring for me to sit here and listen to Tim speak. Just the fact that Telesat is taking on this challenge, but obviously, in conjunction with the Canadian government. I mean, this is an innovative leap, but it's so powerful. When it works, it's going to be so powerful, and it's not just going to be so powerful for Canadian citizens, but your video showed it. It's going to be addressing other communities around the world that have these same challenges. I'm in awe of it, and am very impressed that again, not only the Canadian companies are doing it, but the government seems to be quite behind it. The deal, I mean, this gentleman is one that worked that deal with the Canadian government to make it happen. So you should probably, I don't want to take the words out of your mouth.
Stephen's getting excited.
You go for it. But to hear that the Canadian government is well behind it, and to see that interaction and that healthy relationship between industry and government on something that is so substantial like this is, it's impressive.
And maybe I'll jump in.
Right in.
For those who don't know, so over the summer, let's take a step back. In the budget, 2019 budget, the federal government came out and said they wanted to deliver 50 megabits down, 10 megabits up to every Canadian across the entire country. Didn't matter where you live, you wanted the service. And just even that alone just highlights, I think, Canada's ambition. If you look around the world, there's very few, and I actually can't think of any government who's setting the target that high. And we kind of applaud the government for that. So the government wanted to reach universal connectivity, and we see LEO as playing a huge role in this, and so did they. So over the course of the year, we worked with the government to basically come up with how do we deliver broadband for Canadians. And it doesn't matter where you go in the world, governments kind of view connectivity through a lens of three issues, and one is affordability. And in Canada, we hear that a lot. The second one would be speeds and speed targets, and the last is quality of service. And we came up with a really, really great innovative approach that was announced over the summer, where the government will be contributing $685 million to Telesat, part of R&D, but also for the delivery of a pool of capacity over Canada. And the idea is to offer really, really, really high speed, really, really, really affordable broadband to Canadians everywhere. And we're still ironing out some of the final details, but it just shows, the Government of Canada has really embraced connectivity as kind of the bedrock of its innovation and skills agenda, and we're very excited to be working with them on that. And I think it puts LEO front and center as far as this is the future, and this is how we are going to reach universal connectivity.
Yeah.
Tim, you're in the government as well. How high is it on your agenda?
It's very high. So in my role, I've been working, I have a direct connection with Infrastructure Canada, And one of the big projects you would have heard in the summertime is a fiber link between Greenland and Iqaluit. That's a strategic decision. It's using up a lot of our infrastructure funding, you know, when we do have a range of other issues to deal with. So you can tell that the commitment is there from the government of Nunavut to be able to address this particular issue of connectivity. One of the logic behind supporting this project is to be able to free up that geo satellite connection and be able to redistribute it that's going into Iqaluit and, you know, predominantly used in Iqaluit, to be able to spread it back out to the rest of the communities, the other 24 communities, so that they can have a better experience. It's no good just having it in Iqaluit and then not being able to connect with other communities out there to be able to make the work done. But beyond that, the potential for, and I just learned this today, the potential for LEO from a government perspective is actually bringing our government from the 20th to the 21st century, in the sense that we will be able to move from direct applications to cloud-based applications, which we can't do right now with the geosets. Jump in if I'm saying something else. But that's huge for us, because from an operational perspective, it really always has been, you know, just load the CD, and we're still at that stage when everything else, and we're seeing it, is kind of like, Tim, you're going to go get that Microsoft account. It's a 365. You got to get it on a monthly basis, and you download it. Can I? You know, that's kind of where we're looking forward to being able to just doing it. You know?
Yeah, and we talk a lot about, we've mentioned latency in this issue of geo to LEO, and you know, some of the real just applications that everyone in this room uses every day. You know, I log into my bank account every day. On a geo, that's a lot harder because of encryption. Cloud, going to the cloud. So, you know, right now the government of Canada is trying to get more and more governments on the cloud, and you know, unfortunately on geo you can't do that. So with the government of Nunavut, LEO will enable that. So that's really exciting. But also things like, you know, sending large healthcare files. So if you have an MRI image that you need to send to a specialist, you know, this is where latency really plays a role. If you wanted to do long distance learning or, you know, e-learning, that's where it plays a role, because you can download, you can do interactive learning. And this is really where it makes a big difference. And that's why latency is just so important, and why we're undertaking this massive project.
Yeah, the whole issue around the telemedicine in general, Nunavut, I just explained to Stephen that you can do it, but it takes such a Herculean effort to be able to make it happen. Like, you have to schedule the two pipes to be able to look at each other, shut down a few of their applications, and then transmit the picture that you need, and then come back on. Like, it's really at that stage. Like, it's not like it's like, oh, we're familiar with these concepts, but they're just not a reality. So from an impact perspective, being able to increase that level of telemedicine for Nunavut means means a much more realistic approach to reducing our costs. Right now, the government of Nunavut is spending about $70 million a year on medical travel, which is a phenomenal cost in itself. But from a human perspective, it means that if I break my arm in Grise Fjord, I have to fly to Iqaluit, and if they can't fix it in Iqaluit, I've got to fly all the way down to Ottawa. Grise Fjord is about the same distance to Iqaluit as Iqaluit is to Ottawa, so that's about a 6-hour flight. Plus, stay in a hotel, 3 days to your appointment, you miss that appointment, whatever, you're spending that much time away from your hometown, and you know, you may get the benefit of an escort to travel with you. You might be a unilingual Inuktitut speaker, having a really hard time having to navigate your way down in Ottawa. There's a whole bunch of other costs associated with not having the access to that healthcare at home. So.
And just building on the telemedicine, so in my past life I was with Telus, which has a very large digital healthcare business. And when we look at the future of where healthcare is going, a lot of it is online. You know, it would be great if I could text my doctor, you know, I've got a rash here, what is this? As opposed to having to go in, you know, it just, that is where the future's going for a whole host of reasons. And you know, in Canada, we always love to talk about how great our healthcare system is. When we get to that point, we need to make sure that everyone has access to it, and that, just because, you were born in Iqaluit doesn't mean that you don't have that access. So I think that's just another kind of taking a step back, looking to the future, that it's hugely important. So.
Yeah, because the reality for most of the communities outside of Iqaluit, Rankin has got a souped-up health center, Iqaluit's got a hospital. But Joe Haven, any other of those communities, have a health center that's administered by a registered nurse, which is like I hate to use the word, but souped-up nurse, to be able to do that. But being able to have access to that diagnosis capacity means that a lot of stuff in terms of rashes or whatnot that are happening with the kids right now would be able to be diagnosed at the source way faster, instead of it's just a rash, go home, take Tylenol.
Or mental health, or
Well,
the list goes
So
on.
the Government of Canada, I think the consensus is that Government of Canada has that site. And the number I have from some CBC is that there's $5 to $6 billion committed to this, broadband everywhere, high-speed internet for everybody in Canada within the next decade. If you go to the CRTC site, you can see the penetration across provinces and territories, and you see, most of the developed provinces are all up in the 90s. The territories, the Northwest and Yukon, are in the high 70s, and Nunavut is 0. So if there's a region in Canada that really needs the attention, it is certainly Nunavut. And it seems like the Canadian government is on board.
Sorry, just to build on that really quickly, and Tim and I were talking about this earlier. If anyone here kind of lives in rural Canada, whether it's an hour or 2 hours, just kind of east, west, south of here, or has a cottage or something, it is a big issue in northern Canada, but it's not just northern Canada. And if we look across Canada, there are areas that are near cities that aren't connected, or they are severely underconnected. So I think the Government of Canada is one thing that they're looking at, is how do we connect all of this. But it's sometimes we like to think it's so far remote, and but a lot of us it's not. It's much closer than we think.
I think we're just a good testing ground.
I've heard that definitely, that Canada is the ideal testing ground with our broad geography, sparse population, very wide variation in rural and remote communities, and a highly educated population. That certainly makes it a great test ground. So on that note, what are the technologies or issues that are the biggest stumbling blocks right now? Maybe in the way of Leo, or maybe just concern and taking attention from all sides. Ariane, maybe address the rocket side.
Sure, the rocket side. I mean, we need to be able to be available to our customer Telesat, and we need to make this reusability work, and we need to make it work well. One of the things that we're doing at Blue is, so you all, I'm sure, have seen the space shuttle. So the space shuttle was a reusable spacecraft, but every time the space shuttle came back, they had to tear it down, inspect it, and essentially rebuild it back up. And at that point, you might as well build a new spacecraft. What we are working on at Blue Origin is what we call operational reusability. So we want to be able to fly this rocket and turn it around effectively and efficiently, so much like an airplane model today. So we are working on that, and we need to make that happen. That's keystone to making the LEO constellation viable. So we're on it, Stephen.
Excellent. Tim, what are the top 3 things keeping you awake at night about adoption of LEO?
I think the biggest one is fair access to the broadband. I'm talking with Stephen a little bit more about that. There's just been such a tumultuous. Nunavut is the final frontier for, it used to be the West, now it's the North. And just watching the evolution of ICSPs and the creative destruction that's coming, companies coming and disappearing and adding to the list. Just that access to it, the affordability of it, what's it going to mean in terms of my internet package, because I think one of the CRTC goals was to be able to also offer an unlimited package to every Canadian, and that sounds really attractive. but we just want to know what it actually means, brass tacks, into my pocketbook, I think is the big concern.
Stephen, what are they working on at Telesat?
Yes, you know, I would say that there's two things I'll highlight. One is just the enormity of the project. It is unbelievably large, and what we're trying to do is really, it's completely greenfield and a complete game changer. And you know, it's just every day we're getting closer and closer and closer to it, and to launching. And you know, it's just that is the kind of, that's one of the kind of the high level things. The other thing I'd say is just adoption, and you know, there's an education component of this when you're trying to introduce frankly a completely new technology. There's just amount of getting the word out, getting people to adopt it, people to embrace it early, and you know, once it's up and running and people see, you know, holy cow, look what we can do, you know, that'll go very quickly. But it's between now and then, and we have one test satellite up now, and I mentioned earlier we did the world's first ever 5G test on a satellite. And you know, that's incredibly exciting, and we did it with Vodafone, and they're very excited about what that means for 5G deployment in rural areas. So that's the other thing, is just kind of building awareness and adoption of LEO, which, you know, I think is growing exponentially. And you know, I would say LEOs are more prominent and in the news now than they've ever been, and that's evident by us being here today. So
Excellent. So I can continue. I can drill them with some more questions, but we have time to turn it over to the folks in the room here, and I see hands shooting up already. Great idea. So we'll take about 10 minutes, and then I'll give everybody a last word, and then we'll be done. I saw your hand go up first, just to the right of this first table here. I don't know if we have a mic I can run around with. Oh, perfect. There we go.
Yeah. Yes, thanks very much. I guess a couple of things. First, I have no issues with the coming down of the launch costs. That makes perfect sense. Going from geosync to LEO, the satellite sizes are coming down, therefore our launch payloads can go way up. I have no issues with that. There's no issues with the importance of broadband, which we seem to be discussing rather a lot. I guess what I was hoping for under this is that the LEOS idea, and I'm getting older. I was actually at the conference when Motorola announced Iridium many years ago. I bet the ex-president, our CEO of Telemedicine, which no longer. So I am a skeptic, I'm afraid, both based on the height, probably as much on 5G as I am on LEOs. The capabilities are enormous. However, the technology that underpins this, there are some significant issues. Just your inter-satellite laser links, for instance, is a huge problem. The uplinks are a huge problem. 2 weeks ago, I was talking to the president or CEO of Viasat. And from his perspective, on a geosync satellite today, we can get about 5 terabits per second. It would take over 100 LEO satellites to come out with 1 terabit per second. So there's a serious capacity issue, among other things. So I guess in terms of what I would like to do is just separate the hype from all of the, you know, where we want in a couple of ways, in terms of do we actually have, or have you estimated, and I've done a lot of financials in telecom, sort of the business case that it would take to make this work in any sense from a practical perspective? And two is from an engineering perspective, since I have an engineering background, and I love the technology, the complexity of this is enormous. We have satellite, I mean, it's the inverse of the cellular problem, right? We have fixed antennas and we've got cars moving. Well, now relatively, we've got people in one place and we've got satellites zinging overhead at an incredible speed. They have, between interlinking all of the satellites, they're in constant motion, the roaming issues on the Earth, and the uplink just to make sure we've got the capacity going up and down are huge challenges. And no offense, but one satellite doesn't test too many of those, those issues. So what sort of a timeline are you looking at before this becomes in any sense realistic going forward, if you don't mind?
Perfect. So on the timing, we're looking to be in service in northern Canada by kind of end of 2022 with global coverage in 2023. On the hype and kind of the reality, what I would say is, you know, in this space there are, you know, Telesat, we've been doing this for 50 years, delivering with GEO, and when we looked at this, you know, our executive team is a bunch of hard-headed businessmen and you know, and women, and they looked at it and said, you know, we're not going to do this if it doesn't make sense. And so what I would say is from a business case, absolutely. I'd also say, you know, unlike some of the kind of the new entrants in this space, you know, we started from what do our customers want? And we built, we're designing and building the constellation to address that specifically. And there are huge, the technology challenge is huge, and we've been working on this for quite some time. And we are, very, very optimistic and positive about the future of LEO. On our phase 1 satellite, we've been doing some really incredible stuff, and we're very excited for kind of what comes next.
I think that's sort of out of your your wheelhouses. Yeah. Okay. There was another question over here.
So I can
got the mic,
pass
great.
the mic
There you
back, so I can throw it over
right.
to Kirby. But he works at CenGen. He can't ask any questions.
Okay.
Yeah, my question is actually maybe slightly more optimistic than the previous question. So if one takes the leap of faith that the technology will work, and I mean I do share some of the concerns that the previous speaker asked. It hits a cost point, and the term affordability has been played over and over again in the panel. The question is like, if you, having listened to the discussion, launch costs are a significant portion, and if one assumes the satellites will be falling out of the skies every 5 years because of the physics of a satellite, where do you anticipate affordability to land in terms of cost per bit? Does it finally stabilize, or is there any way to continue to drive the cost down?
For sure. So on the timing, our satellites will be a little bit longer than the 5-year period mentioned. On affordability, what I would say is this is one thing that we spend a lot of time with the government on, and it really is a priority for them. And that's part of what makes the program that we develop with the government just so innovative, and why it's really, really neat. And the center of that was the affordability aspect, where we get it to a price where it's affordable for the end users, it's affordable for ISPs to build out and expand. We could build this incredible system, but if no one could afford it, then you're going to go bankrupt. So what I would say is because of the amount of capacity that we're going to have, and because of the demand for it, we're able to sell it at a much, much, much lower rate than traditional business today. So we feel very kind of confident about that and excited. And I'd highlight again the Government of Canada's partnership that we did there, as affordability being centered to that.
Hello, my name is Ernest. So the first question is, how long until we see the LEO being launched in space? And the second question is, what is the striking advantage of a LEO over a GEO? Because over here we are spending a lot of money to launch the satellite, plus the maintenance costs are going to be higher. So I want to know if there's a striking difference in terms of the speeds that we are able to achieve with the LEO as compared to the GEO.
Yeah, for sure. So, we'll be in service in Northern Canada, kind of that end of 2022 timeframe. And the jump from GEO to LEO is massive. And what I would say is, like any technology, you get jumps. So, for example, we launched a couple GEO satellites last year, and it represented a 20 times increase of speeds and capacity over Nunavut. That's a big leap. And LEO is really that next big leap. And what I would say is, 5010 is no problem on LEO. We talked about unlimited packages. That's no problem on LEO. But for hospitals and schools and enterprises, we can do gigabit speeds. And I would say it truly does represent a massive leap over GEO.
I think from the technical end on that, you take a beam from way up high that's going to be really spread out by the time you get down to the Earth. You bring that down, you have a much tighter beam, much stronger beam on the ground. Yes, you need more satellites and more beams to cover the entire Earth, but that's where the complexity comes in. Instead of covering the entire globe, the Telesat model is to have very tight beams that are very strong and have a lot better throughput and a lot better spectral efficiency, and point those beams only to where they need to be. So rather than flooding the entire country and the entire unpopulated wastelands with connectivity, you're just putting it where you need it. So that complexity comes in. It is a technical challenge. Hopefully the good folks at Loon can work with Telesat and sort that one out.
Hi, my name is Walter. I'm into IoT, Internet of Things. We heard earlier today that 5G, besides bandwidth, was really designed to provide passive IoT connectivity and all the very special features that it needs. So my question is, to what extent, if any, is LEO designed to address the IoT space, remote sensing, that kind of stuff?
For sure. So, you know, and there's, at the end of the day, so Telesat does a wholesale business model. We basically send bits down and back up. And depending on the IoT, that's really what it is, right? Is we're bringing in that backhaul pipe and what you're using it for, whether it's an IoT application in 5G or whether it's a, you know, watching Netflix. It's just bits going back and forth. You know, I think there are some constellations that are being designed specifically to address parts of IoT and only IoT, but for us, it's a much more broader just IP back and forth.
Yeah, so two aspects of IoT. One being a terrestrial IoT system that is aggregated and sent back to as a backhaul over a satellite link. Another is a direct-to-satellite IoT system where your ground terminal is talking directly to a constellation. That's Orbcomm, and if you're interested in IoT in Canada too, Kepler is another company that is focusing on the IoT market. Where's our next question?
Hi there. Two questions for Stephen. One, I'm just trying to get some sense of the what the system is going to look like and relative capacities. So, do you see yourself primarily as providing a backhaul service to terrestrial ISPs, or do you see yourself? Can you imagine providing a direct-to-client service like to my Wi-Fi router or to my cell phone? That's question number one. Question number two is the capacity you're going to be provide in a backhaul capability. Can you relate that to what it would be like to have a fiber connection? Understanding that you're going to get there before fiber gets there. Just wondering if it's a long-term solution, or if fiber becomes affordable to those communities, will that actually replace the satellite in terms of the satellite link in terms of bandwidth?
Yeah, for sure. So we are a wholesale backhaul solution. You know, the question of direct to consumer or, you know, backhauling to an ISP to do the last mile. So, you know, for the past 50 years, we've done the latter, and we call it a community aggregator model. So for example, in Iqaluit, what we do is we've worked with Northwest Tel and SSI Micro and Bell Mobility, and we bring in, you know, a big, fat, cheap, high-speed internet pipe into the community, and then they will use that to connect the end users, you know, whether it's by fiber, whether it's by fixed wireless, whether it's by LTE or one day 5G. And we find this is the best way and cheapest way to connect everyone. You know, some of our competitors are looking at a direct-to-consumer model, and the reality is, at least from our perspective, is the user terminal that you'd put on your house, it's just not affordable yet. And it's not consumer affordable. So it will be one day, I'm sure, and not as an engineer, but you know, we do think it will. But right now, you know, we're a wholesale option, and we feel that's the best approach. And sorry, what was your second question? For sure. So you know, we kind of look at LEO as a virtual fiber, and you know, there are certain, and I said earlier, there are certain applications where fiber makes the most sense, and if you can put fiber in, absolutely. The reality is that no one's building a fiber cable to a community of 1,000 people in northern Nunavut. You know, it's just a reality of business. And where LEO really fits a role is let's connect those people in a way that's affordable and quick. And you know, it's not like we're gonna launch this satellite and then just that's it, and you know, we're done. We'll be constantly looking to improve it and, you know, have next generations of constellations, and so we really do view it as a virtual fiber-like experience.
I'm getting my red light that we're going over time here. I think we have the mic and probably time for one more question. Yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is Michael. Just like quick question would be, and I believe you alluded to already, you have three competitors from your perspective. There's Starlink, OneWeb, and Kuiper Systems, and you briefly talked about the different models. I understand that. And the second question would be for Blue Origin. It appears look like you're the launch platform for 3 of these systems.
Well, so you know, we are a launch provider to the world. So obviously we're very proud of our partnership with Telesat. Telesat is one of our first customers, so that means a lot to us. But yes, we are going to be working with other constellations. Just like we're working with other LEO constellations, we're working with other geo providers. We have a rocket that is very good for all types of markets. It's a single configuration, so the same rocket that's launching all of the LEO satellites is going to be launching a lot of geo satellites. So yes, so we're proud to be working with everybody.
And I would just add on that is competition's a good thing. It results in a better experience, better technology, more affordable rates. Competition's a good thing.
It appears that you're looking at a niche in your area, and then where somebody else will be, say, to the household, smaller, very smaller communities, smaller bandwidth, of course. But are you looking to be a bigger backhauler?
So we look at a handful of different markets, and every competitor is looking at different things as well. But we see it as there's the maritime market, there's the aviation, aeronautical market, there's government markets, and then there's terrestrial markets. But we're a wholesale solution. We're not a direct-to-consumer.
Well, thank you for the questions. I'm sure we could go on for a while, and I'd be happy to. Tim, you seem to have got off scot-free on the question period here, so. I just want to say thank you to the panelists, Tim, Marianne, Stephen. Thank you for sharing your time and your experience with us. And thank all of you for your questions and listening to us.